Are you still in master's degree, maybe something? Yeah. Good. All right. Very good. Very good. New books coming out from when is she written now? Wow. Jeez. Take a break. Yeah, it's a lot. It takes a lot to write a book. And then you've got publishers chasing you to promote it, right? Travel around. Yeah. Okay, so what time is it? So for those of you online, we have quite a group here. We're in North Carolina, and I think most of the classes have been made available live, I believe, or online, but it's been lively sessions and accompanied by
Can't hear you.
components, chitta, manas, buddhi, and ahankar. So the chitta in the subtle body is such that I refer to it as psychic matter as opposed to physical matter, and it's being subtle. It has the capacity to reflect.
The audio is gone again.
Yeah, correct. Audio's gone again. And his image, too. A lot of the YouTube recordings were very muffled and couldn't make out either. So.
I can see his image, but there's still no sound.
Yeah, I don't see any. Maybe if I put it on multiple picture. Yeah, see, there we go. Keeps coming in and out, so.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
I'll message there to see if I can get it fixed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
those nodes in the same place, and the ripples will become centered but larger, right? Something like that. And then when, with the maturation, so to speak, of these samskaras, then I turn into vasanas, which was like psychological negative. That in the present, you're functioning.
It's doing the same on YouTube. Goes in, goes out. So the sound's not functioning. Wish we were there.
Let's do it on iPad.
Okay. Shall I continue or no?
Okay.
I see some thumbs up.
Can everybody hear Guru Maharaj online?
Yeah, we can hear now.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
very
now.
good. So these samskaras, they mature into a vasana. So this is like a psychological predisposition, and we function, in accordance with that. In all of this, then in material existence, the will of the jiva, which is tied to its agency or its capacity to act and influence, is very much suppressed by that which it has set in motion, by its volition, in response to the environment that has now got some momentum, right? And so the psychological predispositions predispose us to continue to act in accordance with them, and our capacity to come out from underneath that is significantly inhibited. The more that we function with an identification, in identification with the body-mind complex, the more we become, in effect, like matter. In other words, the difference in this sense between matter and consciousness is freedom, the will, and so forth. So it becomes covered. Of course, it's not lost, and the Atma has this feature that it's willing and has will and agency and so forth, but it's covered over. And now with the ingress of spiritual association, then we start to accumulate vrittis in the chitta. And as there are like vrittis, they form samskaras and mature into spiritual vasanas. But now to the manifestation of spiritual vasanas, it requires a deep practice. So, then the question, of course, as what happens in this case is the more that happens, then the more that the jiva is coming out, and its will is being freed, and it can turn away from the material environment influence, and it will embrace then a particular influence from the environment, spiritual influence, sadhusanga, certain chapters of the Bhagavatam, Leelas, names of Krishna, and so on and so forth. And of course, because the jiva's will is being uncovered, it's making choices. Right? That's what the will does, the freedom. But it's making choices based on who it is. That's why I say that we make choices based on who we are. We couldn't have made other choices because we make choices based on who we are. Think about that for a minute. We make choices, there's no doubt about that. We make choices based on, I'm speaking now spiritually. It's true materially as well. But let's look at it spiritually. Based on who we are, we make choices. But we couldn't have made other choices because we make choices based on who we are. And therefore, our choices really are acts more of what I refer to as self-discovery. We see, I made this choice. This is who I am. This is what you see. So our spiritual life unfolds like this. Similarly, our material life does, but again, the will is not really functioning there. It's covered over. The more we become uncovered, I mean, it's there and functions to some extent, but in a very limited sense. It depends how much covered we become. The more we become uncovered from material influence, the more the self's freedom arises, and it's of a certain nature. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, in Sanatana Siksha, the section in which Sanatana Goswami is being instructed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Mahaprabhu is speaking about the Atmarama verse. This is the famous verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's really central to the text, because in this verse, what's said is that, what it's about is the fact that Sukadeva Goswami, who had no material desires, became attached to Krishna in his pastimes, which means they must be spiritual because he has no material desires. So beyond becoming free from material desires, there's something more to spiritual life, which is the fact that I'm ultimately a devotee, right? So from gyan, so to speak, to bhakti. So the verse says, well, why do Atmaramas, those who are satisfied in the self, these would be souls, mystics that have become acquainted with and experienced the fact that they are not inert. That I as often say, they've experienced that in a profound sense, I am. And we all experience that I am, but we think that our I am is threatened because we think I am this or I am that, and those things are here today and gone tomorrow. So we live in some trepidation, right? Of not existing, it seems. But the fact that we exist, nonetheless, is prominent. It's the only thing that we really know for sure. You have to think about that, but I can be sure of that. Maybe all of you aren't here. Maybe it's just this is an extension of that. So this is just one aspect of the Atma that I am. We call it Swarup Gyan. And again, it's the insight, the realization, the experience that I'm not matter. I am. I'm consciousness. I'm aware. I'm aware that I'm aware. Right? Now, in the Shankar Sampradaya, that's all there is, right? But in Vaishnavism, there's something more to be aware of. There's Bhagavan to be aware of, and my relationship with Bhagavan. So that aspect of the Atma, that will not come out unless you have the right sadhana. Let's use an example. Is there butter inside of milk? What do you think?
Mm-mm.
Well, where does butter come from?
The milk.
Then it must be inside.
It's in tandem, though. I'd say it's, one is in the other, but is a label.
Well, we're calling it milk. We're calling it milk. And we're asking if there's any butter inside. And the answer is, yeah, there is butter inside. But the question is, how does it come out? If you freeze the milk, will it come out? No. So you have to do a certain thing. You have to churn it. Then the butter will come out, right? So if you have the sadhana of bhakti, this method, then the fact that you are a bhakta, ultimately, they'll come out. But if you have a different sadhana, like the sadhana of gyan, which is just aimed at reversing the ignorance of my attachment to material things, which causes suffering because they're here today and gone tomorrow, and I like them and I can't keep them, and so forth. Then only this one side of the self, one aspect of the self, will be experienced. So when this verse speaks about Atmarama, it's speaking about someone who experiences that. But that person, in this case Sukadev, became attracted to Krishna's leelas. And so the question is why? And the answer is, well, Hitam Bhuta Gunohari, such is the nature of Krishna. He is the object of love. Sukadev came in touch with him through hearing verses from the Bhagavatam that his father sent with a woodcutter. Sukadev had left home at 16, living in the forest. His father, Vyas, then gave some poetry from the Bhagavatam to a woodcutter who would go and cut wood and for fire, collect firewood, and told him to sing these verses in the forest. Maybe my son will hear them. Just hearing them, his heart was pure. Just hearing them. The Bhagavatam verses, this other side of him, right? There's different terms for it. Gyan Shakti, Dharma Bhuta Gyan, the attribute of the self, of its knowledge. Knowledge means that when we come in touch with an object, the insight of what it is, we call that knowledge, right? So there's a cognitive feature to the self. It doesn't know anything, but it reveals things to a knowing subject. The self is has a capacity to know. And it has the attribute of knowledge inherent in it, which reveals things to the knowing shelter, the self. So here we have Swarup Gyan, the self that's conscious, and it has an attribute of knowledge inherent in it. Jiva Swami turns to Ramanuja for his jiva tattva. He says that what they say, that's what we say, basically. And to give an example, drawing on Ramanuja, if you have a blue lotus, then the lotus and the blue are the flower and its attribute, respectively, which are inseparable, apritak, inseparable from one another. Madhva uses another term, vishesh, to use another example. The oneness and the difference between an ocean and a wave. And in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we say, achintya bheda bheda. These are all similar ways of talking about something that is pervasive in Vaishnavism that is absent in Advaita Vedanta. In Advaita Vedanta, of course, the jiva is, as an individual is thought to be an illusion, but ultimately there is Brahman, and you are Brahman. And Brahman doesn't experience bliss. It doesn't know anything because there's nothing to know. There's no object. There's only Brahman. So the Advaitins say that Brahman is bliss. It is knowledge. Whatever that means. Contentless consciousness. Ramanuja would say there's no meaning to contentless consciousness. There's no meaning to that. For there to be consciousness, there must be something to be conscious of. This is the Vaishnava reply, right, to consistently in all the schools to Advaita Vedanta. There's no meaning to this. This is a word jugglery, contentless consciousness. Consciousness means of something. So there is a world, for example. There is a world out there. Shankar says there is no world. So the Vaishnavas say, no, there is a world. It's just not what you think it is. It's there. And so there's an aspect, or an attribute of the self called knowledge. It's called, Ramanuja calls it Dharma Bhuta Gyan, so that the Dharma, a characteristic of the self. And because the self is eternal, its characteristic is eternal. So the jiva has inherently eternal knowledge. It has the content of knowledge. And when it's in touch with an object, that manifests. Now, that attribute expands or contracts. So under the influence of the Maya Shakti, it will contract and be filtered. And your knowledge will be distorted. That's what we call material knowledge. Again, to use another example, that the self is like a lamp that is self-luminous. It knows, let's say, I exist, right? And its light also shines on other things, revealing them. So that projection of the light is like the attribute of knowledge that's inherent in itself. And when it shines on something, then the thing lights up and it's known, right? So that attribute can expand or contract. And this expansion or contraction doesn't constitute a transformation of the Atma, which is said in the Shruti and the Vedas and the scriptures not to be subject to transformation, like to birth or death, or old age or disease or dwindling, giving off byproduct. These are all material transformations, and there's no internal transformation. But when the knowledge expands or contracts, it's not transforming the very constitution or nature of the self. It's compared to something like, if I sit here and then I get up and walk over there, and then I go into the next room and I lay down, I have not been, there's some movement, but there's no transformation of me. So the Vaishnavas explain like this. And so typically in material life, the self is, like I said, aware that it exists, but it's misidentified what it is with this or that, and therefore it feels that it might not exist. You have to struggle to exist, and so on and so forth. And so its knowledge is contracted and filtered and distorted. But with the good association and sadhana and influence of the internal energy, then it expands that knowledge, right? So Sukadeva in the Bhagavatam, he heard the Bhagavatam, and his attribute of knowledge now revealed himself, excuse me, as a servant of Bhagavan, not just conscious, different from matter. And he came in contact with the perfect object of love, right? So this knowledge includes knowledge that, again, that I'm a servant of Bhagavan. That needs to be in the jiva. Shankar would say, knowledge that we acquire is all just going on in the antakaran, the material subtle body. When that material subtle body is destroyed, then there's just being, contentless consciousness, which we call, fantasy, basically, incoherent idea. Now, if bhakti is thought not to be inherent, then there's a problem, because it goes to the core of what we're talking about here. Because then it says that those who think like that and have misunderstood the sandarbhas of jiva, Goswami, like that, they really embrace an Advaitic perspective of the self. The self is just consciousness, that's all. Swarup Gyan, just consciousness. Just consciousness. And then it gets a spiritual body that has knowledge, that has bliss, that's ontologically different from the self. That's a problem. Because it's said to be yourself, but it's ontologically different from you. It's all external. What is the difference? Here's a good question for you, between that and your present condition, right? You have a body. It has an antakaran, it has experience and knowledge, but it's different from you. And we're saying that's the whole problem. You've identified something that's not you. Now we call it a spiritual body, but it's not really you. It's just a dress. It's just a uniform that you wear. So in order to be yourself in that perspective, you have to wear a uniform, the Siddhadeha. But if you look carefully at Jiva Goswami's teaching, and the teaching that comes from his successors, particularly in the form, let's say, and we're referencing him, you recall, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. He was a direct student of Jiva Goswami. He took the teachings of the Sandarbhas and put them in a beautiful narrative, taking the complex Sanskrit philosophical and theological discussions into simple and poetic Bengali, again, in the context of a narrative of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's life. And in the context of that, one chapter is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is teaching Sanatana Goswami. Right? And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was speaking about this Atmarama verse in the Bhagavatam, where Bhagavatam is marveling that Sukadeva became attracted to the pastimes of Krishna, and he had no material attraction. Therefore, there must be spiritual activity, movement, right? In transcendence. It's not just still and absent and contentless and so forth. So Mahaprabhu, going through every word of the Atmarama verse, and when he speaks of the word Atma, he says there are several different meanings to the word Atma. And he says, one of them is Swabhav. Swabhav means inherent nature. And then he says that the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would tell Sanatan that the Swabhav of the jiva is the experience and the sense that I'm an eternal servant of Krishna. But, the verse goes on, that sensibility, that experience, that knowing, is covered by attachment to the material body and mind. What he's saying there is that the jiva has an inherent nature as a devotee. And each of us is individual, so each has an individual swabhav, inherent nature. This is then a kind of the genetic code, if you will, of the Atma. And given the right environment, it will come out. We hear the Bhagavatam, we hear from sadhus, and our practice becomes firm, and vasanas then will start to form that correspond with, well, who we are. What is our genetic code, if you will. It's a long explanation, but the beginning of our practice of bhakti involves clearing away the material vasanas, the material samskaras that have been dragging us around here and there, even against our will or covering over our will to a large extent. So first, this cleansing is going on. As the cleansing goes on, as the self starts to come out in practice, when the practice becomes very firm, or we get very firm, association that can theoretically inform us about our nature. This will also help to form samskaras, vasanas, but they will form, as I say, according to, let's say, use the analogy of our genetic code. And so the point here is that who we are is inherent within us as a servant of Bhagavan. Our spiritual body then is inherent. It's not something that's superimposed on us who are just a blank slate. We're not different from who we are, which doesn't make any sense if we were. When we push this inherent bhakti, it's based on a misunderstanding of the sandarbhas that ends up with this kind of bizarre conclusion in its naked form. This is the naked form, if you will, of the non-inherent nonsense. That's what it is. The naked form, the non-inherent, this is what I'm revealing here too. The naked form of the non-inherent nonsense, which makes you different from the personality in Krishna Lila that you supposedly are. How can you be? It's ontologically different from you. It's all going on in the Sarup Shakti, and the Sarup Shakti is not inherent in you. So, and we follow, for example, Krishna's Kapiraj, later Baladev Vibhusa and Bhakti Vinod Thakur, then we get an understanding of the Sandarbhas that's much more organic and wholesome and so forth. And so, to answer your question, yes, so these material samskars are retired. That's called the cleansing of the heart, right? Cheto darpana marjanam. Cheta means this chitta. Darpana means like a mirror. Now it's got images on it of the world. We turn the mirror towards Krishna instead of the world and dust it off. First dust it off, clear those images, and turn it towards Krishna, and then another image will come. And what the image will be, when I realize Krishna, I realize who I am in relation to Krishna. The two are, they're one. Yeah. I'm going to see Krishna according to my inherent nature, and I'm going to be attracted to the bhakti that corresponds with my nature. And I'm going to make choices for that type of bhakti. Now, of course, we're in a Gaudiya Sampradaya, and we're all here because largely we have swabhavas that correspond with what Gaudiya Vaishnavism facilitates bringing out. Madhurya Rasa, a particular kind of Madhurya Rasa. And to some extent, sthayi-bhava also. Nityananda Prabhu is fairly prominent in the Sampradaya. He's Balaram himself, right? Now, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission, as I say, is deep in this regard, but it's also broad. As we heard the other morning, he's also, Krishnadas is also the Yuga avatar. So Yuga avatar means oh, that's a bigger thing, bigger in a broad sense, right? So we can find, and we have, that persons by the influence of the Chaitanya Sampradaya, the Gaudiya Sampradaya, and the particular paribar that we are in, called the Bhakti Vinod Paribar, that people are being touched who have swabhavs even for Vaikuntha or within Braj Bhakti for Vatsalya which is facilitated largely by the Vallabha Sampradaya comparatively. So this is the breadth. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's tradition has given life in the modern world to Ramanuja Sampradaya, to the Madhva Sampradaya, making them known. They're written about in academics. So previously, to the campaign of Prabhupada, for example, would be in Indology, it would be very difficult to find anything other than Hinduism culminates in Advaita Vedanta. Wait a minute, there are 4 other schools of Vedanta, our Sampradaya, our particular paribar. That means our paribar has some life. With life, they're driven by the life to share, by the bliss to share their experience. So that's my answer. Do you understand? Yeah. So material samskaras, if we want to retire those, that's the beginning. And as we do, same time, to use an analogy of decorating a house, well, first you got to get rid of the things and then you're going to put the decorations, new decorations in, right? So it's happening simultaneously. But again, according to the swabhava of the jiva, its inherent nature, and it's going to respond to different external influences. In this case, it would be this chapter of the Bhagavatam, that chapter of the Bhagavatam, this side of that. Now you have to distinguish that from some mental, idea. You could get involved in bhakti in a particular way based on material samskaras. You might, for example, think, I really like that guru. He sings really nicely. Or I like that guru because she's a woman and I don't trust men anymore. This would not be on the basis of your inherent nature, but the basis on your material samskaras. You could get involved. So that's true. But then over time, if you actually progress, then the self's going to come out, and you may have made a good choice based on something external. That's fine, no, not a problem in a sense. But ultimately, you're going to be uncovered, and if you will, and make choices based on your swabhav, or you're going to resonate with influences based on who you are, on your inherent nature. Yes.
So our narratas are connected to a material samskara.
Of course, yeah. Of course, yeah.
Okay.
Anarthas means false values. Yeah. They have nothing to do with the nature of the self. They're all external. Yes.
I was wondering, so does the whole non-inherency idea nullify the us being servants of Krishna?
The question is, does the non-inherent perspective that some Gaudiyas profess, does this do away with us being servants of Krishna? Well, they wouldn't say that, but what they're saying is that the self, you, the Atma, is simply contentless consciousness. That's what you are. That's what you are. That's all you are.
Which
And
implies that we're not servants. There's no feeling of being a servant then if there is no distinction.
it does bring into question, what kind of servant am I if the service is really being done by a Shakti that is not inherent in me, and that they stress the Swarup Shakti is ontologically different than the self. Well, the Siddha Deha is made of Swarup Shakti, constituted Swarup Shakti. The emotions are all going on in the antakaran, the spiritual antakaran of the Siddhadeha. They liken the self to the battery that drives the car, but that doesn't make any sense because the car in this case, the Siddhadeha, is itself conscious and superior to the Atma. So it's very you're right to ask that kind of a question, practically speaking. But you see how more organic this the concerted Vaishnav opinion is. And as I said the other day, Jiva Goswami's teaching or the Gaudiya teaching doesn't arise in a vacuum. It's one of, it's a Vaishnav Sampradaya that has so much in common with the other. And this is a basic core difference between Vaishnavism and Advaita Vedanta. You are inherently servant of Krishna, and you have a body that's non-different from you. Gopal Tapani says it's Atma-vritti. Atma-vritti mean, in this case, here vritti doesn't mean an extraneous thing going on in the mind. It means it has a different meaning. It means the very character of the Atma. Atma-vritti. And he explains, and this Atma-vritti includes a parshana deha, a spiritual siddhadeha, a spiritual body, which is, how you want to function. So, as a devotee, yes.
So, in following with the Atma question, there's unlimited jivas with Atmas. So, are all of them?
They're all devotees of Krishna.
They're all devotees of Krishna.
Krishna means Bhagavan.
Okay.
Krishna means inside of Krishna is Narayan, Nishinga, so some, he has unlimited forms and so forth. But yeah, it means that the nature of the jiva, the jivatma, is that it is inherently a servant of Bhagavan. That's what it is. That's its dharma, its nature, its very purpose. Life has a purpose. It's meaningful. There's a telos to the jiva, which is to attain the realization that I am a servant of Bhagavan. We exist only for that purpose. The term sometimes is that Brahmanuja uses and Jiva Goswami puts is sheshatva. There's the sesha and the, what is it? The seshin. Yeah. So who the seshatva is one who serves the seshin. It exists only for the purpose of delighting its source. Put it in those terms. We have a source, is Bhagavan. Our purpose is only to please him, to serve him. So this is what all Atmas are about. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Right. Let's try. Go, family.
my question is related to Gurani Priya's question. I wanted to ask about brahma-sayujya and the fact that even in other Vaishnava Sampradayas, it's not really recognized as a real goal, but in our Sampradaya, it actually is recognized. So taking consideration this sthayi-bhava of the jiva, that he knows that he or she is servant of Krishna, is brahma-sayujya a form of service to Krishna? Is this feeling still realized there, or is it only temporary because the jiva cannot fulfill the role of being a servant of Krishna and then has to change its position?
The question is about brahma-sayujya, because in Gaudiya Vaishnava we say, well, you're not Brahman, but you could kind of merge with Brahman in a sense and identify with Brahman in a way that does away with the material conditioning and so forth. We call it sayujya mukti. So Brahman here means undifferentiated Brahman, indeterminate Brahman, compared to Krishna, who's determinate and full of qualities and leelas and form and so on and so forth. So some souls, they pursue brahma-sayujya. We say that what Shankar describes as Brahman is not accurate because there is a jiva. He says there is no jiva, there's only Brahman. We say there is a jiva, but we say, well, the jiva could identify with Brahman and enter into Brahman. Its individuality is still there, but it's not aware of its individuality because it's fully identified with the whole, right? So we call it sayujya mukti. So the question is, if every jiva is a servant of Krishna, then does this sayujya mukti, is that some kind of form of service? No, it's not a form of service. And what that is about is realizing the swarup gyan of the jiva, that first part, because you haven't got the right sadhana to bring out your relational quality, relational aspect of the self. It's not realized there. Therefore, Sanatana says that even people in Brahman, they can move on from there. It's possible by Krishna's grace to realize their relational feature as a servant of Bhagavan. So it's Bhakti-Vinod Thakur calls it an indistinct form of liberation. The full nature of the self is not realized, but its difference between matter and itself is realized. But it's realized in a way that's problematic in terms of ultimately realizing its identity as a servant, because there's not a lot of facility in Brahman to move on and realize that and take up bhakti, right? Therefore, Gaudiyas are very cautionary about this particular approach. They think it's better to be in the material world and have material desires. Think about it like this. Material desires may be many, and you may be very much ensnared in samsara, right? But the desire to attain sayujya mukti, mukshatva, for it to be successful, has to be stronger than all material desires put together. You have to retire all the material desires by this one desire. I want to be liberated. I'm prepared to just walk into the Himalayas and live in a cave, whatever it takes, right? So this is a very powerful desire then, and it forms it doesn't form a bhakti samskar, let's put it like that. You get a samskar for that. Now to turn away from that and develop bhakti samskars, well, you're in a worse position. If you talk to somebody that's just really into the Gyan Marg, it's going to be difficult to change their mind. Compared to an ordinary person, it may be easier. So therefore, the devotees conclude you better be in the material world and loved imperfectly than to not love at all forever and just be. This turns things on its head. We're saying this form of mukti is undesirable. What? How can that be? We would rather be in the material world. Yeah, because there's sadhusanga here, canvassing, and opportunity for bhakti, and so forth. Yeah.
So in this sense, it can never be a final destination of jiva. So
Well, you could be there forever. It's possible, but you would not have fully realized yourself. But you've gone there by your own doing. So, yeah.
There's some follow-ups to this as well.
I also have a follow-up of her question. Yeah, it's like these vasanas and samskaras, the material ones which we accumulated. Can we? Is it needed to work on them? Like, let's say if you have a trauma and you need to go to psychotherapy or stuff, and like these traumas, they are hurdles for your spiritual advancement. Do you need to work on it like with psychotherapy, for example, or you just fully neglect and you just engage in spiritual?
Well, that has to be judged yourself. If you have the ability to engage in such a way that they can be unraveled and done with, then it's fine. If you don't, well, then you might take some help for that. It depends on your evolution and capacity to absorb yourself in bhakti. Bhakti has that capacity, but your potential, your capacity to apply yourself in bhakti, that may be limited, and therefore you make your determinations accordingly. Okay, what are some questions from online? Yeah.
Yeah, there's full follow-ups to this topic as well. So Sajan has a follow-up. Should be able to hear him through there.
Okay.
Dandavats Maharaj. Yeah, this is a very deep and beautiful conversation. So what you mentioned earlier about how we make decisions based on who we are, you said. Would it be fair to say that we make decisions based on who we conceive ourselves to be or who we imagine ourselves to be? For example, if we think we're the body, then
materially speaking, that's the case. We
Yes.
think we imagine ourselves to be something that we're not, and based on that, we make decisions. We're identified with that, right? Materially speaking, yes.
So in the same way, if we actually conceive of ourselves to be what we were told that we were in the Shastras and by the awakened masters, that we are Satchid Ananda, and we actually conceive ourselves to be pure existence, pure awareness, and pure unconditional contentment, then it would seem to follow that the potential is there, the unlimited potential is there to have all of the experiences and serve in all the ways that we wish to in precisely the way that you described. Would that be accurate, Maharaj?
Well, in a sense, that what you contemplate and the type of sadhana that you pursue, that's what you will attain. There's no doubt about that. But the one that you choose, that will have something to do with your genetic code or whatever, your svabhav. Yes.
Thank you
else?
so much.
Nam Bhajan was saying that you explained about the inheritance of Gyan in the jiva, but what about Ananda, the inherence of Ananda?
Of course, there's ananda in the jiva. All the scriptures say that. Of course, there's ananda in the jiva. Why? Because bhakti's in the jiva. In fact, properly understood, knowledge is bhakti. Rajavidya, Rajaguya. What is the king of knowledge? Manmanabhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Baladev himself, Baladev Vibhusan identifies, even refers to bhakti as knowledge. So this attribute of the self, the Dharma Bhuta Gyan, bhakti is included in that. Bliss is included in that. Of course the jiva has bliss. Of course the jiva has knowledge. Yes. The scripture are full of statements to that effect. Now, the non-inherent sector says no, right? I've written a whole article about that, and like Disciple Vrindavan has written 3 more articles about that. It's kind of like the book's full of, to use a baseball analogy, walks and base hits, and setting up for 3 articles, which are kind of like a grand slam to deal with this particular issue. And so look forward to that. But the non-inherent school says that there's no knowledge in the jiva, as we've been discussing, and there's no bliss in the jiva. It's just contentless awareness. So the bliss is going on. Bliss, properly understood, is Swarup Shakti. So it must be unmanifest in the jiva. There's 2 types of jivas in one sense: Nitya Mukta and Nitya Baddha, eternally liberated and eternally conditioned. Those who are eternally conditioned can become liberated. What's the difference between the 2? Well, those in the spiritual sky, they're obviously full of bliss and knowledge, right? Was not added to them at any point, right? That's part of their constitution. The only difference between those who are materially conditioned and those who are materially liberated is that those who are materially conditioned, the Bhagavatam says, are turned in the wrong direction. They're turned away from Bhagavan. They're not ontologically different. They're turned away from Bhagavan. You turn them toward Bhagavan, then their inherent nature comes out. And what's inherent in them, they're not ontologically different than the liberated souls. And the liberated souls are inherently blissful, knowledgeable, and so on. Furthermore, of course, the question is, well, how can the Tatastha Shakti be one with the Swarup Shakti? But this is a misunderstanding, because the jiva is only a Shakti in a kind of abstract, in an indirect sense. The jiva is a dravya, a substance, like fire is a substance, material substance, and all substances, fire, water, earth, for example, they have Shakti. So what is the Shakti of fire? It has the capacity to burn. That's a Shakti. That's a Shakti. So we jivas, Jiva Goswami explains in this and that, we are all dravya, but we're a conscious dravya, self-conscious dravya, different from fire, water, earth, and so on and so forth. But we refer to it sometimes as a Shakti in the scriptures because we function like a Shakti of Bhagwan. We function like one of his Shaktis. But we're a dravya or vibhinamsa, a separated part of him, right? So the dravya has Shakti. So what is the inherent Shakti of the dravya? Material Shakti, Maya Shakti, is not inherent in the jiva. That's extrinsic. What is the intrinsic Shakti by which the jiva functions as an eternal servant? Well, that must be Swarup Shakti. That's your only choice. But it's not manifest. Because why? The jiva is turned away. But then the argument will come, well, how can the Swarup Shakti be covered over? We see it all the time. The fullness of it can't, but a particle of it, unmanifest in the jiva, it's not that what the jiva has turned away from it. Let me give you an example. The verse of the Bhagavatam says that the materially conditioned jiva is turned away from Bhagavan, and the terms used there are imply some being antagonistic, against, going against. That's what it implies. He has turned away, he's gone against. Well, how could you turn away from Krishna? Not that you were there, you turned away, but you're perpetually turned away is the idea. And so you're functioning in a way that is, in ignorance of or ignoring Bhagavan. Okay? So let's say you're a devotee, and then you commit some offense to Krishna and the devotees. You've gone against Bhakti and Bhagavan. Then in extreme cases, what we'll see is that Bhakti contracts. It becomes unmanifest. It's still there, but it becomes unmanifest. And then over time, and after rectifying it again comes to the surface. So we have practical experience of such. Of course, you may say there's no Swarup Shakti in the jiva. When we say that, what is meant is the jiva here means the conditioned soul. There's no bhakti manifest in the materially conditioned soul. But the Atma is not conditioned by matter. Just like it said, in one part of one Upanishad, in one section of the, I think Chandogya Upanishad says that the liberated qualities of the jiva, of which 8 are described, I believe, are not in the jiva. It's impossible for the jiva to have them. Impossible to have them. But then a little later, it explains, but that the Atma has them. He's distinguishing the jiva from the Atma. And if you look at them, you think, well, what are they? What are they? Like freedom from death, freedom from hunger, freedom from old age. Well, obviously the Atma has all those qualities, but the jiva doesn't have them. In the conditioned state, it's impossible. But they're inherent, right? So in one place, Vishwanath has commented on one statement from Sridhar Swami in his commentary on a verse from, I believe, Vishnu Purana, and he says that there's no Swarup Shakti in the jiva. So that someone want to jump on that and make a whole philosophy out of that, but I've just explained that away. You understand? Swarup Shakti means that's what it means. That's to be that's the devotional energy. It's not inherent in you. That if it's external to you, always. So there's no conflation between Tatastha Shakti and Jiva Shakti because the Jiva is a dravya. It's really not a Shakti. It's manifest from the Tatastha Shakti of Mahasankarshan. It's a transformation of the Tatastha Shakti, a certain power of Mahasankarshan. In the spiritual world, 99.9, well, you can't really make calculations like that there, but the vast majority of the liberated jivas are all Tatastha. Even the Nityamuktas are also Tatastha. They're transformations of the Tatastha Shakti. When you come to Radharani, well, then you have a transformation of the Swarup Shakti. Krishna is the substance. He has Shakti. Radharani and Krishna, they're one. It's one person, two persons, one soul, one Atma. And there are other kind of primal Parshad associates of Krishna who are Tatsarupya. Whereas the Nityamuktas and sadhana siddhas, they're Tadrupya. So a slight difference. One is a transformation of the Swarup Shakti, the other is a transformation of the Tatastha Shakti, endowed with Swarup Shakti. Endowed with Swarup Shakti, which is bhakti. So, yes, the jiva has bliss, sure. That's the whole, and this is, let's go to Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam, this is the conclusion of the Brahma Vimohan Lila. One of the principal conclusions of the Brahma Vimohan Lila is, as it's described there in the text, is that just what the Brihadaranyaka says, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, that it's not the wife that the husband loves. It's not the husband that the wife loves. It's not the children that the parents love. It's not the parents that the children love, but it's the self. It's the self that one loves. When we extend ourself to identify with the house, with the country, with the family, then we think we're loving the house, but we're really loving ourselves. When I say it's my house, I've extended myself into the house by way of identification. And I love the house, but really I love the self. And what it's saying, what the Upanishad is saying, is that all these manifestations of the material world, they have no substance to them. There's no bliss in them. The bliss is in the self. The self is the object of love in this world. And the self is the one thing in this world that most resembles God, right? And so the Bhagavatam goes on. Why is it that the self is the seat, Jiva Goswami says, of Nirupari Prem, Nirupari. When we clear away the upadhis, the designations of American, Indian, male, woman, black, white, child, adult. These are all upadhis, designations. Clear them away. What we really see is that in this world, the seat of love, of nirupari prem, is the self. We're moving in search of ourself, aren't we? You went to the moon, what were you looking for? You're really looking for yourself. I is one of the smallest, it's the smallest capital word in the English dictionary. It's the most used and the least understood. I. We use it more than any other word. We understand it less than any other word. And that's what we're all looking for. Everyone looking for the self. And why do we look for the self? Why are we attracted to the self? Because the self is part and parcel of Krishna. We can sacrifice the whole world for the self. And similarly, we can sacrifice the self for Krishna. That's what bhakti is. Sacrifice the self of course, it's knowledge too, but to serve him. So, bliss in the self, of course. Right.
Prabhupada also had a question quite connected to that, Raj.
Okay.
He was asking that if our sthayi-bhava is inherent, how can it become degraded by offense, as mentioned in Bhakti-Rasamrta-Sindhu 1.354?
It becomes stalled. Oh, I know the difference. Yeah. This comes in chapter Bhava Bhakti. So it's in Bhava Bhakti, it's premankur. It's only the sprout. It hasn't fully developed. So that's temporary. It's talked about there that it may step back, and in the basic, each of these sthayi-bhavas, right, has certain basic fundamental characteristics. The basic fundamental characteristics of Shantarasa is also in Dasya-rasa, plus a little bit more. The basic fundamental characteristics of Dasya-rasa is also in Sakya-rasa, and something more. And so we go up the ladder, right? So it means that the basic fundamental characteristics, if your sthayi-bhava is Sakya-bhava, it would be stalled from realizing that. And until the offense is cleared, because the result of the offense cannot be permanent. But the result of one's practice will be, but it may be stalled, it may regress, and we see people offend bhakti in this world, and then in different ways. This is a way in Bhava Bhakti. It's talked about even there's a possibility of offense. Of course, to add to that verse speaks about a possibility that really, for all intents and purposes, like doesn't exist. So that's how I would answer that one. Good. Yes.
Thank you, Tripurari Swami, for this enhanced path of bhakti. I found myself, have grown up as a Gaudiya Vaishnava, becoming very critical of the difference between principle and details, particularly in the details in search of the principle. And, especially in a lot of my discussions with my parents, I chase around in a lot of circles because I want to forego a lot of details because I think that they begin to cloud principles. And so what I'm looking for, my question would be is, where do I draw the line? And, I know that this would be a fluid line between foregoing the details in search of the principle. At what point can I let go and, accept some details just because they take me further to the principle?
Well, the details are meant to deliver the principle, so they're alterable. The very characteristic of the question is about details and principles, and the conflating the two can become a problem. I say that if you misconstrue details for principles, then you have to remain a neophyte. And you think, the detail, different party bars might have different details. Okay, your bead bag has to be this color because the guru liked that color, and it says, he has his reason. It has to be white, or it has to be. And so you come with your saffron bead bag. You cannot go back to Godhead. That, right? So this is misconstruing, conflating a detail with a principle, and then you don't have the enough understanding or grounding in the teaching to be able to understand that, and so you remain a neophyte, or in Bhakti Vinod's terms, barabaki. You're burdened by the misunderstanding of the conflating of details with principles. It's a problem. Now the reverse of that is worse. So if you conflate a principle with a detail, then you have no adhikari. You understand? If you think that the detail is the principle, we're still in the ballpark, but you're just like not getting on base, You're striking out, but you're still in the league, whatever. But if you misconstrue the principle for detail and think, I want to do what Guru Maharaj says, and just be, just follow the principles and not the details. And so I think this is just a principle. Guru Maharaj might not agree with you on that. Let's say, for example, you decide, I don't really need a guru. That's just detail. Well, you just did away with a pretty core principle, and now you have no adhikari, no adhikar, no standing. So just to make that clear, but I think that with good guidance, then you will be given details that should, upon following, bring you in line with the principle and realizing of the principle. When you have your own depth of understanding and experience, then you're able to do it on the fly and determine what details will be useful, but what not, and so on and so forth. That's why I say that sadhana is really kind of an art. Learn. And you have to tell your own temperature. You have to know what you're after. See, am I getting it? If not, well, maybe I should adjust. And of course, in most cases, then we'll have to check in and ask, what, get some advice, something like that. So they can be, tailored to some extent. I'll give you an example. It's kind of a crude example, but Prabhupada used to ask his disciples to only to marry and have sexual intimacy only for the purpose of procreation, which was a pretty high bar for hippies, especially. Or just finish singing, if you can't be with the one you love with the one you're with. Love should be free, right? Yeah. So it's not, he was very compelling, and his persona, was very attractive and so forth. So they got on board, but as it turned out, it was a little harder to, higher bar to practice, over time. So when Prabhupada became aware of this, and some of his disciples brought it up to him, I'm following this. I'm not following this. I can't follow this detail. Then he probably could see that detail needed to be adjusted, because it's getting in the way of delivering the principle. So he adjusted it, and he said, well, then, they should have sexual intimacy with the significant other only within marriage. That was a big relief for whoever was asking. Right? So That's an example of how Prabhupada adjusted. He had two standards. So he was flexible. Often he's presented as being not flexible at all, but I wrote a whole commentary on this in my Ostakam about Prabhupada's flexibility and his own conception of himself as a flaming liberal. He was a flaming liberal in his own estimation. If you study carefully in psychology, you see it's pretty much concluded that the liberal mind tends to identify with more largely with compassion. I mean, we'll go into that in one of my next talks, but Prabhupada was ruled really by his compassion, and he set things in place based on different things, with the culture that he came from, and which is largely tied to some scripture and so forth, but adjustable. I just read, in fact, a comment of Prabhupada's from his, I think his purports in Chaitanya Charitamrita, where he's saying, and in our mission, boys and girls, they are no different, and people are criticizing. They have no idea how to spread Krishna consciousness. In Indian culture, we do one way, but people are different in other parts of the world, and if we cannot adjust to them, then and basically saying you're just a Kanishta Adhikari, and you're criticizing me for engaging women equally in bhakti. Whoever they were, people from the tradition. He's got boys and girls dancing in the temple together, like it was some type of rave or something. One of those, but I've been at the Fillmore in San Francisco. That was a long time ago. So, so it wasn't what they thought, and Prabhupada made. You don't know how the concessions, the arrangements, the flexibility that Prabhupada exercised. He looks unflexible. He had a nice conversation with Allen Ginsberg. He said, "You're pretty conservative." I'm not conservative. I'm very liberal. You are conservative. Conservatives don't want to change. I'm offering you knowledge of how to conduct yourself so that you can change for the better. But you are conservative. You don't want to change. You are conservative. What else? Any online questions?
Not at the moment.
Yes, Kishore.
You touched briefly on theoretical knowledge and experience as a way to create samskaras or vasanas. I was wondering if you go a little more into detail about the relationship between those two and creating.
Question is about theoretical knowledge as opposed to vigyan or experience with regard to creating samskaras, because I commented that with sufficient theoretical knowledge consistently, then when they develop samskaras, based on that, more than on applying itself in practice. Well, the two are combined together. So typically we practice based on a theoretical knowledge that we receive. But in some instances, the theoretical knowledge may be less and the practice may be more. In some instances, the practice may be less and the theoretical knowledge may be more. And that may have an upper hand to an extent, at least to intellectually kind of align oneself. You get that, disposition. And of course, it should be accurate in good sangha, so it will align with your nature. And then by practice, it'll be experienced. So it's useful to have strong and spiritually grounded theoretical knowledge. It's part of our sadhana, really, right? So we say that samskaras will come through sadhu sangha. Well, what does sadhu sangha do? It teaches us, right? It teaches us, sets an example, and it teaches us. And then subsequently, we practice. Subsequent follow-up of that is the practice of these things together. They're forming the samskara. That help?
Yeah. I've heard vasanas described sometimes as like a riverbed. And
Never heard that one.
and that like for water to flow through. I don't know. I was just thinking about it in relation to that.
Yeah, you
Never even heard that.
mentioned riverbed. They gave us a comparison with riverbed. Samskaras is something which you already have digged riverbed.
What's the time?
10 to 10 to 1. So 11. I got from sunny. Yeah. 10 to 1. Yeah. Perfect.
We got a little carried away there with the first question. It's very complex. So if anybody understands it, you can explain it to your friend. But we're putting together a book about this. It's quite a good book. It's an important book. It's an important book for the whole sampradaya, I believe. And we have authors from all from the Bhakti-Vinod Parivar, from Chaitanya Saraswat Madh, from Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj's Sangha, from our Sangha, from ISKCON, also different authors contributing articles, just going over this from so many different angles and whatnot. I think you'll find it very rewarding. It's a real service, and it arises out of really a criticism of Bhakti-Vinod that's difficult to tolerate. And so luckily we have good answers. You had a question?
If you like.
What is it?
So just to play the devil's advocate for a moment. So if bhakti is inherent, then what's the point of Lord Chaitanya appearing to give something that hasn't been given for a long time? And why does one need a guru to give you an ingress of Svarup Shakti?
Bhakti is inherent, but it's bestowed at the same time. So it's unmanifest. So to make it manifest, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives an example, analogy about this. He says that a man was living in his house and poor, but an astrologer told him, actually, there's a treasure in your house. It's inherent in your house. You don't know it, but it's there. And with his advice, you find out, where is it? Don't go to the west, don't go to the north, don't go to the south, don't go north, south, west, which he identifies with yoga, gyan, samkhya, whatever, other disciplines. Turn to the east. And then that, which is bhakti, in this analogy. And then the treasure, you'll find the treasure there. So to use another modern example, let's say you have an inheritance, right? Does anybody here have a will? Okay.
Paul has a will.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's say you include your kids in the will, which is typical, right? So then you do the children's inheritance is inherent, right? They have the will. They're in the will. The inheritance is theirs. But then they need certain circumstances for it to manifest. So time and in that case and so forth. So similarly, we have wealth inherent within us, and in time, in the right circumstances, it will manifest. It's unmanifest, but it requires the astrologer to point it out in the first place, because we've turned away from our nature. We're absorbed in material life, and it has great power. Ignorance. It's the basis of our material existence. So to uncover it, we need to use Sridhar Maharaj's analogy. For home going, we need a home knowing person, right? and home is in heart at the same time. So both. Does it make sense to you? So I'm giving you your inheritance. How's that? You know. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai. Ki Devi ki jai. Lord Bhakti-Vrinda ki jai. Lord Brahmananda.
Bhaktivedanta Tripurari Maharaj, Srila Guru Maharaj ki jai.
Oh. I'm seeing so many of you. Hare Krishna.
So I can see everybody.
Yeah.
Wave.
See our group here. Yeah. Hold on.
Well, we can see them if you turn it around.
Turn around. They will see that they were. No, they will. Yeah.
Haribo! Oh, that's funny.
You've been there before, right? You've been in there.
Yes.
What?
We visited there once, it was fine.
Aw.
Oh, there's Indra and
And
Saki.
Saki and Chandaruki.
Go up a bit.
Saki who?
I'm Saki. Indra.
Indra and Saki.
Lalita Saki.
Lita Saki.
Yeah. Aw, Haribo.
Haribo.
Yeah.
Haribo, Haribo. So nice to see you.
Haribo.
There's Indra.
Chitta.
So beautiful. Thank
So
you so
beautiful.
much.
Oh, Haribo.
Aw.
Didn't know who they show.
You said I'm fine. I'm the editor for our books.
Jai. Saki. All right, Haribo.
Just thinking. Everyone okay.
Okay.